Great, thank you, Annie. Switch over. Presentation's up.
Yep, looks good.
Awesome, thank you. All right. So like I said, my name is Derek Crombie. I'm the Business Process Unit Manager for the Center of Educational Performance and Information in Michigan. We are a division of the State Budget Office in Michigan. And here's just a quick list of our missions and values of how we operate. But to succinctly put it, CEPI's primary role is the collection and reporting of data to comply with federal and state legislation, compliance reporting, data collections that help figure out fundings for the schools, a variety of issues. And what we do is we coordinate the data collections, analyze it, store it in a longitudinal data warehouse, and then we can produce reports that go directly to our data portal or can go out directly to individual stakeholders. My background as like I said, the business process unit manager, I focus heavily on coordination and project management within the office, making sure processes are in place for our various units to do their jobs and their functions, and then also to manage the overall portfolio of work for the organization. So as we talk about the solution we came up with, it's kind of important to understand the overall data cycles that CEPI goes through. And so there'll be a little bit of background here, but it'll help explain the overall story. When you see a data cycle here, this represents what it takes to collect and report a single year of data from a CEPI perspective. Defining the data, collecting it, the data quality there in the blue under it represents the checks we do during the collection process. ETL stands for extraction, transformation, and loading. That's taking the data from its format, from its collection purposes, and recompiling it for efficient reporting. Then the actual development of reports, and then transferring information out to the portal. So to execute, this would be done on one school year's worth of data. So if we were saying like for right now, we'd say the 24-25 school year, it actually takes 3 years to execute it, because we'll spend a year defining it, a year collecting it, and another year reporting it. So what does that look like in a little more detail? If we were to look at it, if you look at the collections, that's what you're seeing off to the left. That blue box is trying to color code it to line up with the screen I just showed you. The green bars represent the various data collection applications that we operate and facilitate. The blue represents the data quality processes we run in the background. Then as we move from left to right, you can see the extraction, transformation, and loading to the longitudinal data system, the various reporting outputs or extracts that go to the data portal. So that's just a little more nuanced in the initial slide. And then the challenge comes, like I said, it takes 3 years to execute a single school year's worth of data. But because of that, we're always working in 3 years of data simultaneously. So we're always defining 1 year, collecting 1 year, and reporting on another year simultaneously. So it's a significant amount of work that has to be juggled between our various units. The other piece we work with as well is that our IT shop, the Department of Transportation Management and Budget within Michigan, they're partnered with us. They're not part of CEPI, but we have services from that organization assigned to us as IT resources. So we're managing actually resources and tasks from 2 different organizations simultaneously. So the way we've been managing prior to the solution we got in place is we were actually having independent project files for all these different processes within the office. So you had a file for each one of them, each functional area within the office within a data cycle. But then because we're in that 3-year structure, it gets stacked up. Lots of files, lots of multiple pieces. And what we were doing before we got an online solution is that these individual project files were all sitting on a common share, and they were cross-linked with hard file paths, interlinking key tasks within each file. And then we were wrapping it up with a master file. We were actually embedding all of these inside of an individual file, having a common resource pool file. Um, so the amount of interconnected data was getting significant, but we needed it for the complexity of the work that we had. When you look at it, I'm just checking my notes here. It took in our previous setup about 7,600 total tasks in project to do 1 year. So if we were looking at it from a simultaneous standpoint, we were dealing with 20,000 plus tasks in a simultaneous window coming online and offline within a similar time frame. So the challenges got to be this extremely manual processes. Um, and the teams weren't accessing it. We didn't have everyone having project on their desk. So we have a team of coordinators who would meet with teams and sitting down and going, did you get this done? Did you get that done? Updating files on a regular basis. And you can see some of the other problems we were having. The networked files were crashing as we got bigger and bigger and bigger. We couldn't keep it operating. Like I said, files could take 40 minutes to open. We couldn't even put a baseline on a project because it was just too much. It was too much data, replicating all those files. And aside from the update process being extremely manual, we were using that master file format to pull extracts so we could build reports on a weekly basis, but it took hours. We would run it like every Friday morning and it would take hours to do it. And then it could be out of date quickly. So what we did is we partnered with PROJILITY and we set up Microsoft Project Online, and immediately had significant success. We went back, we imported 5 years of history. We got rid of those crash issues. Our files open dynamically now in seconds. Enterprise fields, which Project Online has by default, we were trying to emulate in our common share environment. And that was extremely challenging because one fat finger mistake in a particular column, you'd get it wrong and then things didn't line up. We can use enterprise fields now for consistency across the files. Everyone now has web access to view the project files through the web app, as opposed to just having only a handful of people with the desktop app. We had been using our project portfolio and new development work on top of our operations work. And that's a key line to draw here, is that what I've been talking about for the last few minutes is our operations work. The work that we're doing from year to year consistently, the collections, the reporting and such, on a regular basis that we knew we would be producing over and over again. We also have new development work. If a new app came along or significant additions came along, we would manage those in a portfolio to align with that work. And we were doing that all via SharePoint. Now we have that portfolio piece equally integrated in with our operations piece. And we've gotten rid of a lot of that Excel reporting by connecting all of this into Power BI. Both in a combination of using the Hammerhead suite provided by PROJILITY and also custom reports that emulate some of the unique things we were doing previously that now we can do in an automated fashion. So we get to next steps, a very successful implementation of Project Online, but then it came with some unique challenges we wanted to go through. So we started talking about doing updates, and the challenge we got there is people could do the updates through Project Online on their tasks, but in reality, it was a fair amount of our office using DevOps to do their work. Our collections teams were more still in a manual Microsoft Project task-driven process, but our report, ETL, and portal teams were in a very deliverable-based format where they were doing work deliverables in DevOps. So the feedback from managers and staff was, well, I don't want to do the work in DevOps and then also have to report it in project, which gets us to the dual entry point that's on the screen here. We also want to get the project coordination staff out of working in those updating files and then getting back into better metrics and better forecasting. Part of what I was saying earlier, how one part of CEPI was using DevOps and another was not. Trying to get everyone switched in a mindset to let's get to deliverable based ticket based items, so that the organization had a little more consistency in how we're looking at work. Some of the other things too, in the way we were using DevOps, instead of having the team got very used to using individual tickets that would be reassigned from one person to another. Um, it made for ease of notifications, but it made it hard to track and get some of the ideal metrics we were looking for in order to do some of that forecasting and planning things that we wanted to do going forward. And then one of the challenges you'll see in the next slide is how our DevOps situation is set up. This provided an opportune moment to look at not only updating our DevOps environment, but also aligning it with Project Online, because the way we had been operating, if we go back to a data cycle, we just look at 1 year at a time, you can see that those gray boxes sitting on the peripheral were instances of DevOps. We had one working predominantly with our collection systems, one with the longitudinal data system for ETL and reporting, and one for the data portal. And the data portal and longitudinal system, those dotted line connections, we were able to use a simple export from project to kind of bulk create some tickets, but there was no sync between them. And the collection system was using, they would put more ad hoc tickets in for development, but no link to the actual operational work. The challenge this created here for our technical team from DTMB was, if they wanted to see, if they're developers or our database analysts in those areas wanted to see all of their work, the challenge would be we'd have to query each one of those DevOps environments individually and try to overlap views to try and get an idea of resource and capacity. So it made that extremely difficult. So like I said, we saw the opportune moment of how can we make project and DevOps work together to give common views? Because when you look at a DevOps ticket and a Microsoft project task setup, they're more alike than different. You know, I actually used to talk about it when we were previously working with it in the office, and people would say, well, what about DevOps and what about project? And it was almost like I joked, it was a separation of church and state sometimes between what we were tracking in each. But when you got to the core of it, and you can see with these highlights here, you can very easily see how a ticket name and a task name and assign to and a resource, start and finish dates clearly line up, but how these fields are more alike than different. You know, DevOps being the focus of this is the system of doing, and project being this is the system of planning. But how do we make them play nice? How do we get them to help each other and get the full picture? So we started to put together requirements for what this unified approach would be. One would be moving to a single DevOps interface, and with a single interface, you know, those three instances I showed you earlier in the the kind of the map we did, there was a slightly different interface in DevOps and different fields between the different areas because they all got developed independently and at different times to manage different areas of work. To move to more of a unified bureau perspective and being able to make comparisons, we need to have everyone using the same fields and running out of the same instance, just to create the ability for, you know, better comparisons and interactions. We wanted to allow for the creation of tickets from Project Online to DevOps, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about that delineation between the system of planning and the system of action. So if we do good plans in project, we then can move that plan to DevOps for execution and then pull that information back. Part of maintaining that is the predecessor successor relationships. We use, in that multi-file setup we use a whole multiple series of interconnected predecessors. We even there are times, for example, with an ETL section, we use something we like to call proxy. There might be one ETL that completes, and when it moves into the reporting section, there might be, from a single ETL data load, there could be 30 reports that once that data are loaded, we're ready to go. So we use a proxy feeding over from the ETL file. We send it up to a proxy section in the reporting file, and then use that single predecessor that's linked back to the previous file to repeat 30 times throughout the file that these are related. These are now a successor of that proxy date pulled over. Notifications of when, and on the predecessors, we wanted to maintain that relationship and be able to make sure that not only when we set that up in project properly, that when it came over, when the tickets get created in DevOps, that entire predecessor-successor relationship maintains intact, because that goes into the next piece about when the predecessors are cleared on assigned tickets in DevOps, teams are notified. When we were using what I called I used to call sometimes big fat ticket approach, when we're using one ticket that passed back and forth between individuals, we would assign it. It's not a best practice in DevOps, but it's how our team was using it. They would, Bob would do a task and he knew Susie had it next, and he would assign it to her, and she would get notified that the ticket's now in her name. What we want to do now is, if we're breaking it up more substantially, and you'll see that as we go, instead of having one ticket, we actually have a feature with multiple tasks under it, and the user stories are connected to one another in those predecessor chains that come over from project. When the notifications, when a predecessor is cleared, the next person gets notified. And then the teams then can track the work in DevOps using sprint cycles. Our DTMB team has been using sprint cycles for some time. CEPI in its business approach has not. But now that we're working in a common environment, we're using the same time boxing that our technical team was using now with the business team. We want to capture effort on our tickets. We want to capture, excuse me, I had a phone call. Sorry about that. We want to capture effort on the tickets as they get worked on with data we hadn't had before. Our DTMB teams work in Agile, and our business teams have not. So in order to do better work with some of the reports that we have in Project Online, we want to be able to have estimates on that we haven't had in the past. So we're actually going to capture some effort in the tickets, and then allow for the sync of data elements to go back and forth between DevOps and project. And that's really the beauty of it. So it gets out of those manual updates we were doing in the past, and the key data is going to come over as the teams work on pieces in DevOps. When they change statuses, that'll actually relate to percentage complete, and the actual finish dates will come back into project from DevOps. And then having some tools in DevOps to actually track work in progress. And it's a little more, like I said, of the system of execution versus the system of planning. So those are the requirements that evolved. And this is a little bit what the integration structure comes in at. So looking at what we came up with, and you can see Project Online over to the right and DevOps sitting all to the far left. What we have is enterprise data that moves between Project Online and the desktop client. You see that in the bottom. And what happens is, as the teams, as our coordinator teams who work with MS Project Desktop, they will make all the changes. The information syncs back to project, but that Windows server we have in the middle has the web services and the SQL components to pass that data over to DevOps and back and forth. So Project Online and DevOps can stay synced, and then we leverage SQL to order have the Power BI reporting run off of it. So a big part of what we do here with the ticket structure is how we were equating DevOps to begin to align with hierarchies in project. So in leveraging how DevOps functions, we used a grand epic. In our case, we're using it primarily for school years or significant new development. Epics are major areas of work then within a school year. The feature essentially is a deliverable within an epic, user stories then being the task, and then bugs, which are only being used, we're not using those back at project, but bugs can be generated off a user story for our validation components. So what that starts to look like in bridging the two, trying to see how things look. So if you look at DevOps over to the right, and we could say, we took an example here, let's say this was a report, and we're saying the grand epic is from the school year 24-25, and it's reporting, it's a feature, and then you can see the individual tasks there, the DevOps that we wanted to get. So how did we get those built in the DevOps? Well, we go back to the project file. We're already working inside of 24-25. So inside the light green boxes you're seeing represent individual files. So if we were looking at the reporting, that's the one that's expanded out. The 24-25 file in light green at the file level, we link that grand epic to the school year. Then we define that this is a reporting epic from DevOps back to it. And then we can link the deliverables from the task hierarchy inside of project. And we'll get to that when you see the screens. Once we have that set, we can use the add-on to build the projects via the service and map that out. And then the map fields at the bottom represent additional fields beyond the core hierarchy that gets synced. So the way we look at it, we have a work planning process that we use with our teams now. This is lifted directly from the manual we put together for our team. We color coded it so when they go through their slides, it's pretty clear where they are in the process. So my BPU team, we work in Microsoft Project to get the schedules developed. We get the dates correct. We get the resources assigned, who's going to be doing what and when. And once we're comfortable with those schedules, further ahead of our sprints, we then go ahead and dynamically create the tickets. As we move into the ticket prep section, now what we've done, we've put the onus over to the actual teams working on it. So this is a little bit before the sprints, and we let the teams know the tickets are created. What they can do now is come into their DevOps tickets and do any prep that's required. If they need to add acceptance criteria, if they want to tag a coworker, if only one person is assigned to an individual ticket, but if they want to tag a coworker who might be involved, they can do those pieces to it. Once we get up to the sprint and the tickets are prepped and stated as ready to be worked on, we then can assign individual tickets and features into sprints, and then we can execute the sprint. And the teams then work on them back and forth. They follow the development process, and then we can retro at the end. And the nice thing about what we've learned with this too is how dynamic and quick we can be to adjust. If we suddenly see a process wasn't working right with what was sent over from project in the previous sprint, we can quickly adjust project for the next batch we're going to create and bring those changes into the next workflow. So this is where the magic actually happens. This is the project desktop add-in. It's just a screenshot from project. And if you look at how we do it, so the ribbon at the top is the custom piece that PROJILITY helped us piece together. On the far left, you can see you connect to DevOps. And that sets the connection up. But the main things we focus on, and I grayed out some of the staff pieces here. If you look at some of the columns on the page, the key things that we kind of focus on are the epic and feature columns, which are right to the right of the task name. That's setting up that hierarchy. And the way it works is the epics are predefined. We go ahead and build the epics ahead of time inside of DevOps. And then when the service connects, if you look up in the ribbon, you'll see a DevOps epics with a pull down. It says on this one, 2425 with the ETL. And what that'll, oh, here we go, we got the arrow. So we got the pull down here. So this links right back to DevOps and populates the epics. And then what we can do is when we want to create a feature at the roll-up level, so this would be the feature. The roll-up represents the deliverable we want to build. So what happens is we can come in and we can select the item. We can define it being from this epic, and then we create the feature. It'll go through, put a DevOps number on it, and then it makes it available then to be chosen from this DevOps feature pull down. What we do then is we can then select the rest of the tasks that are under it. And once we do that, we can hit this create mapping. It will then populate the epic and the feature field. And then that will set up the mapping then for the rest of the tickets to be created, because once everything is set, we've got other key required fields that have to be done. But once those are set, we can hit sync with DevOps, and it will send it over to DevOps, and those tickets will dynamically be created. In fact, initially when you come through, these are all blank. So, and when we run it in real time, as the system, as it goes through and it's syncing, it's pulling back data, syncing back things from DevOps that were already created. And when new items are ready to be created, it's automatically dropping in these DevOps ticket numbers. And we can control which ones are being looked at too. We actually added a sync status field to this, so we can actually control which items are being analyzed and which ones are not. And it also helps control which features are showing up in the menu, which is great. That was something we just learned learned as we went that helps control the amount of work that's being filtered by the system. So that's what the mechanics look like from project. Now we get to what it looks like in DevOps. So here's just a sample user story. And you can see when things come over, and I had to split the screen up here a little bit. We couldn't fit it all on the one screen. So we've got our ticket number. We've got, this is the file name, the task name that came directly over from project. Initially, they come in a status of new. This was being prepped and getting ready for work. We have our area paths. So this knows what team bucket to place it in. We have it all mapped out. We put our team names in. We also map over an individual and the team name. So we know what bucket it's going into for on the DevOps side. Iterations we add later. This is when actually we assign it to the sprint. But some of the fields we talked about adding, that completed work. This is where we're going to ask people to complete items or complete information on the amount of time they're spending, so we can pull that back. Start and due dates. These are coming over what was listed initially in project. And this first year we expect to be a lot of, we'll see what some of what we've been saying in schedules and some of what the reality is as people work on them in DevOps, and this will help us refine our schedules over time. We have Microsoft Project Assignee. Actually, this ticket goes to our DBA team, which functions out of a queue, so no one was specifically assigned to this ticket, but normally this field would be populated by who is assigned in project. And then we also have SMEs. In these DBA scenarios, we need to have a contact that they can follow up with if there's someone who needs to talk to. We've got description, acceptance criteria, discussions. We can tag people for additional pieces here, but this gets the ball rolling on what someone would do and come in and prep. We classify by application, our content areas. Those are some of the additional business fields, but a big piece of what goes on is this related work section. And this is where we talked about earlier some of that successor piece and how important that is for us. So this actually shows the parent link has already been established automatically when it was created, so we can see what feature this individual task is a part of. We also can see the predecessor's ticket and the successor ticket and what their status is. And if you want to see a deliverable from a broader perspective, what you can actually do is click on the actual feature, and inside of the links section, you can actually see now, and this is one of our ETLs, and ETLs are probably our more complex pieces. ETLs have up to 25 to 30 tasks on them now in the way we've redesigned them. But we put a numerical sequence in here so they sort properly. But you can now see the entire flow of an ETL and where we are sitting in the process. As we move through, these states would be changing as we were going, and we can move right through the story. And then how do our teams navigate it? This is the brainchild of Brandon Johnson, who is one of the managers over with DTMP that we partner with. So he developed a series of dashboards here in DevOps that can be leveraged to see where teams are functioning on a regular basis. So if you're not familiar with DevOps and these dashboards, each one of these blue boxes is basically a query, and it's a visual widget that it works with it. If you click one of them, you'll actually go into a query view for DevOps, and you can see what items are inside of it. But by using our area paths, those team buckets I talked about earlier, you can see how work items are in states that are either not ready for pickup, progress, resolved, completed. So we can see how the pieces are moving through the queue at a given time. And these assigned to the sprint. So when you look at the dashboard here, you can see this was functioning off of what the current sprint was. It actually ended yesterday. That was our first sprint through the cycle. And we can see where the teams were at times. So that ready for pickup goes back to that whole concept we talked about with the predecessor piece on there and the waiting for predecessors. So if predecessors have been cleared and the next person is ready to go, aside from getting notifications, they can click right in here too, and they can see where they are and pick items up directly. And one area this is going to help our organization, I think, tremendously is when you saw before, our old project files were team focused. We had one for data quality. We had one for collections. We had one for reporting. What's happening now is we're adjusting our schedules to fit this new reality is that it doesn't make a difference where the work comes from. If it came from a DQ file or it came from a reporting file, it's all becoming bureau work. Because when we go through and get more granular with how we're breaking things up, we're able to really assign it individually. And when these dashboard views allow people to see the buckets from their team perspective, they can say, oh, well, I got an item that's ready for me. It doesn't make a difference if it came from this schedule or that schedule. It's giving everyone because everyone was focusing more in their kind of individual silos initially. This is kind of breaking those silos open and letting everyone in the organization know, well, I've got work across the board and I can see where it is in relation to other people, because sometimes we had people in different status meetings. It's just provided a whole avenue for communication and transparency that's really opening things up. And like I said, we're just starting to use it, but even in 2 weeks, there were some aha moments, which have been fantastic, and it's doing exactly what we're hoping to do. We were actually able to take a section of a schedule where there used to be a handoff where it went from one schedule to a giant block in another. And we looked at it just 2 days ago and said, gosh, it just makes sense to delete this whole section in one area and let's put these subtasks in the other one, because now that the work's all combined and we don't have to have it in a separate schedule. We don't have to look in 2 different places for this information. This is consolidating and streamlining. And then for troubleshooting, this is a quick screenshot of a Power BI report that PROJILITY put together for us. And this has been really great. If there's ever a time where we have an error with the syncing of applications, and whether it's it does have the capability to go to a nightly sync. We haven't turned that feature on yet. That would be more automated. Right now we're just trying to get it running manually and getting everything smoothed out. But this allows us to look at logs, and if we could see if there are failures, this will actually help us go right to specific. We can actually track to specific line items going through the different areas and say, this batch failed, it went back to this line. Did we do something wrong? Is it a technical issue? We had a bug that popped up in the testing of it where we initially didn't account for a null row. In project there was a blank row. We didn't think about it, and we were using this tool able to go back and go, oh, that's where the process failed. So we were able to go back in and make that individual adjustment. So that's been extremely useful too, to do the diagnostics behind the scenes when something didn't quite go right. So I know I just threw a lot at you there. Annie, I think I'll hand back to you.
Great presentation, Derek. We all know organizations are looking for better ways to organize their projects and align DevOps with Agile development processes. What a super example of how you and your team have made this work done at CEPI. We'll now open the floor to questions and answers. Remember to enter your questions in the question and answer manager at the top of your team screen. Let's see if there's any questions in the queue. I don't see any right now, but if someone wants to pop one in real quick, we'll take that. Well, if there are no questions for Derek, oh, I think I saw one come in. Derek, do you use the delivery plan feature of DevOps with MPO?
That's probably more of a question. I think, is that more on the code deployment? Just to clarify.
While we're waiting for them to type, let's take another question.
Okay.
What was the biggest challenge you ran into during this rollout? Was it technical or adoption of the tools?
Technical wasn't too bad. Probably the biggest technical barriers we probably had was just installing some of the applications. Large enterprise organization, government has some controls on it, so there was a little bit of that, going back and forth and getting firewall rules and that, between organizations, getting that set up. But that once we probably had to wait on those for bureaucracy more than having to deal with the actual technical implementation. You get the red tape out of the way and we would get the technical piece figured out quickly. I would say the biggest challenge of this was probably internal with teams, and making people feel comfortable with change, specifically our teams that were already using DevOps, and getting them to realize the benefits, obviously, that this was going to serve not just for them, but also for the organization, trying to find those win-wins and getting people up to speed, but ultimately, I think part of the key was having a team that was already experienced with it, making them realize it wasn't going to be that bad. This is slightly different than how you were using it now, and trying to anticipate, some of those spots. So I frequently, myself and my team, putting us in the situation of, all right, let's take our developer project manager hats off and sit in the developer queue and think about how this, changes process for them. And what really helped us is our testing. We found some users in the office who were really enthusiastic about this, and they kind of became our champions, which was fantastic, because once we involved them in a couple test runs, over the couple months it took to put it together, they could come back to their teams and say, oh yeah, this is gonna help. It's gonna help a ton, and also just constantly stating that, this isn't going to be perfection out of the gate, and this is organic, and this is going to evolve. And I think that's where everyone realizes it now. We can evolve. And there are some requests they've come in, it's like, can we change this? And some of them now are great. I mean, it's like, yep, we can execute that quickly. And even what's happened over the last month in our office is that our office has gone through a reorganization, and some people are like, oh my gosh, we've got this all set up a certain way. And once I showed them very quickly how we structured some of the hierarchy, I'm like, all we have to do is define it and we can switch over quickly. And people are like, wow. So it really helped. I mean, the time we spent with PROJILITY, Scott Ennis helped a ton in figuring out, that we both spent a lot of time on that hierarchy and structure. Also with Brandon Johnson, again, from DTMB on our side, we spent a lot of time talking that through and getting it straight, so that now that it's flexible and dynamic, and we got a curveball thrown at us, and we were able to play it without a problem.
Thanks for sharing, Derek. Back to question number 1. Our person got back to us and said, the delivery plan will lay out features in a schedule view similar to a Gantt chart. I was wondering if you found a way to tie that into Project Online. For example, you could lay out a feature delivery plan based on the start and target dates.
We haven't done that yet, but that is some of the features we want to get into in the future. Our focus, like I said, for the moment has been heavily on just getting the mechanics of sending the tickets over. But yes, we do want to get into that more advanced planning.